All right, I'll kick this off. All right, it's very exciting to be doing this a little bit different than how we normally do it. We're doing it remotely this time around for the Boston Film Festival for 2020. And we are going to be doing a question and answer time with the filmmakers from Stro, the Michael Desaro story. And we're joined by the directors and producers, Doug Nichols, Greg Lynch Jr. And we're also joined by one of Michael Desaro's longtime friends, Michael Tarascio. I hope I said that correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. All right. Thanks for joining me, guys. And thanks very much for creating a really interesting documentary, something a little bit different for our festival this year.
Thanks. It was fun.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Now, Greg and Doug, you guys have worked together before with this particular genre and topic as well, haven't you?
Yeah, this is our second film together. And I actually run a fencing history archive. And so my thoughts of documentary films sort of tend towards that direction, or at least they have so far. So we did our first film about a Hungarian that defected to the US that wound up in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is where I am now. And Greg and I finished that film in 2017. And then we actually had money left over in our budget, and we got the green light from our funder to apply that to, not as much money, but we got some money, and we applied that to the second film, and we somehow made it to the end.
So you obviously enjoyed working together. You enjoyed that first experience enough to decide, hey, let's give it another crack, but let's take a look at Michael Desaro's story instead.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about whether that was the right one to pursue. Greg had some ideas about going after some other personalities. Fencing is replete with a lot of really fascinating personalities. Mm-hmm. But with Michael in particular, he was my college coach. And I'd always sort of been a person that kept everything anywhere. So I had a lot of material from when I was in college, but then through an ex-wife of Michael's, I got a bunch of additional material. So we had just a lot of background and supporting material, whether it was news articles or photographs about Michael and his life, that really sort of gave us a leg up on pursuing this particular topic.
Interesting. So you knew him quite intimately.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I knew him for about 20 years, and he was my coach for about 13 of those years. So I worked with him for a long time.
Excellent. And so were you friends, or did you and Michael Tarascio know each other during that period as well?
Michael knew Mike Desaro earlier than I did. He was one of his students in San Francisco long before I started fencing. So Michael had a view into the character of our subject that was different from my perspective, because I met Michael when I was in college. Yep. And he dealt with me as a college coach and a student. So we had a different relationship for sure.
Got you. And so Michael, do you think that the film is a fair portrayal of Stro?
It's interesting, of course, and I'm not 100% positive, to be honest with you, because some of the stuff I learned myself about him. But he was a character, and he was a very sensitive person. And I met him in 1968. I was in the Army, and I was stationed in Fort Ord, which is in Monterey. And I went to San Francisco to take a lesson with him, and I ended up driving to San Francisco 4 days a week. That's 119 miles one way.
4 days a week, man.
But partly was just to get away from the Army, to be quite honest with you.
Gotcha. That's fair.
Right. So that was like 52 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you had a long friendship with Michael Desaro.
We were very close, and he was a brilliant coach. He was much more than just a coach to me. He was really a very close friend. And my first coach told me that if I was going to be in San Francisco area, that I needed to go and work with Michael. He told me this. And yeah. I had a brilliant coach who actually just passed away 9 years ago today. And so it ended up that I was an average good fencer when I started with Michael. Average. Right. Good. And 3 years later, I was on the world championship team.
So he was and you attribute that directly to his coaching?
Yes, because when I was younger, before being in the Army, my first coach had a certain style, and I was scrappy, let's say. Mm-hmm. And I really didn't understand fencing. I could just score points.
Yeah.
And then Michael, when I got with Michael, he sort of got into my head a little bit and explained to me what the game was all about.
Right.
And I thought about it, so then I was able to incorporate his style.
Yeah.
So my first coach and Michael were my best coaches ever.
Amazing. Greg, earlier on in the movie, there was a line that was sort of said that stay away from Michael DeSaro, and I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that, because I got that he was a complicated character, but we didn't expand too much on why these people were told to stay away from Michael DeSaro.
Well, he was completely different from all the other staid, like normal coaches you would have. I mean, he was a product of the 60s, and he had all these different theories about, what should we do. And he was a rough character too. I mean, he had rumors about drinking and smoking and just this way out there lifestyle. So, if you had a young kid that you wanted to fence, it was like, well, maybe we don't go to Michael DeSaro.
Right.
And
so
they were kind of pointed at it.
So it's
But people that
sorry, go ahead, continue.
But the students that got there and were influenced by him really could understand him. I mean, as one person puts it in the movie, he attracted the rebels and the outcasts and the people that were different, and he could really approach them and get to them. And because he could get to them and see them, he had tremendous success.
Gotcha.
So there was a barrier built in there. It's like, how do we get into Michael DeSaro's world? And a lot of people said no, but a bunch of people said you really should try it, because look at the success rate that he has.
Amazing. Yeah. I noticed obviously Doug and Michael have, an interest in the fencing. Do you, what's the term? Tread the boards, or what's the term?
I became a C-level fencer with Michael DeSaro as my coach during the 1990s. I was his student in West Side Fencing Center, but I knew him earlier too, because two of my friends, Cole Harkness and Gene Ching, were his students. And they would come back and tell tales of what he did and what kind of coaching. I'm just like, oh my God, that just sounds like the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
And one of the stories that Cole Harkness tells was kind of like, well, if I ever make a movie, I need that story in the movie, because it's just the best. It was just such the best story.
And your background that you have right now too, is kind of appropriate, I heard.
Well, this is a photograph of the gym where Michael DeSaro taught fencing at San Jose State University. And Doug knows it very well, I'm sure. And a lot of the people that were in the movie were in it too. And I had a chance to go over there and film some of the old locations where he taught, in his office and stuff. It's a little different now from when Doug was in there, but
yeah, it wasn't pink when
I
I
thought
was
it would
there.
be fun to, no.
How long did it take you to compile all of these interviews and footage? Because it seems like a big task, big undertaking.
Well, I had the images sort of all scanned because of the archive work that I've been doing. All the imagery was ready for Greg, because Greg's the editor as well as the co-director. So I had all that stuff sort of ready to go. And between the two of us, we sort of figured out what were the strongest images and what were the images that we needed to help propel the story. And so Greg had all of that. And then it was a question of going out and corralling the 50 people that we interviewed. And that Greg did a lot of the legwork, most of the legwork on finding the people. We sort of worked together to figure out who we needed to talk to. And then Greg made all the contacts and made the arrangements. And how long did it take us to actually shoot, Greg? Was it 8 months all told?
No,
I'm not solid,
I think
obviously.
we started we started in late August and we finished in about January.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So the big thing was tracking people down, and some people didn't want to be found, like Al Morales, who was like the mystery man of the show, is like, if we could find Al Morales, it's going to be really good, because Al Morales was his biggest rival. And we could, everybody's like, yeah, and eventually I saw an article in the paper that mentioned his lawyer. And I contacted the law firm and I said, hey, look, I'm a crazy guy. I need to talk to Al Morales. And they eventually got back to me and we did get Al Morales. But it was a lot of finding the people and then hoping. I mean, Doug found one guy up in Bolinas named Jerry Goldstein, who was another, how do we find this guy? And, Doug eventually through messages and stuff got him. But after all, it took it took about 4 months to film everybody. We traveled across the United States. It was, which we did for The Last Captain as well. So we kind of knew what to do, but it was a big endeavor.
I can imagine.
And Jerry Goldstein was his best friend.
Is that right?
He was a lot of fun.
True. His best friend.
The photo that we have of Michael Tarascio standing on the hood of the Cadillac that's all wildly painted in front of the fencing cell was taken by Jerry Goldstein. I think it was taken by Jerry Goldstein, but that's Jerry Goldstein's Cadillac.
Yeah.
It's a pretty neat little paint scheme going on.
Sure.
I wanted to chat about the a little bit later in the movie. There's some really sort of I thought it was quite powerful stuff. Is finding out how his marriage kind of fell apart, and then the transformation that he went through, growing his hair back out and putting on the skulls and all of those things again. Some of that was quite sad towards the end. You sort of look at it and you feel quite sad towards the end, especially with his illness and everything else. But were those years where he sort of went back to his younger self, were they a happy time? Were they a positive time?
Boy, it's really hard to know. At that time, he and his second wife had split, and he moved to Los Angeles and started teaching at a very popular club, which is where Greg and I both interacted with him in Los Angeles. But he wasn't terribly social with a lot of the fencers at that time, in my experience. I'd known him for almost 20 years at that point, and we weren't terribly social. And I don't know how much that carried over with other fencers that he was around. I know he had a social group that he engaged with a lot, but it didn't necessarily map to the fencers that he was training. So it's a little hard for me to know exactly where his head was at. I think he always was sad that relationship had broken up. I think that was always true.
He was still quite in love with her when she finally made that decision to sort of go into her own thing.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever in Michael's vision of his future that those two would split up.
And he never had children, did he?
He had one son from his first marriage.
Yes. Right. And I can add a little bit about Michael. I can add a little bit about Michael when he split up, because he talked to me on the phone about it. And he was really upset. You could tell it. So I invited him out to South Carolina for a week, because that's where I was living. And I said, come on out, do a little camp with me. And he, told me a little bit about, some of the stuff. But what was interesting was he was really sad. And I don't know if, you guys know, but Jane Littman, do you know Jane?
I know
Jane Littman was a clinical psychologist, and she coached with me, and I was her coach. And Michael and her did not get along very well for whatever reasons. And by the end of the week, Michael left South Carolina smiling, and thanked Jane, and really attributed some things to her, that he was able to process the information and said, yes, I guess it's time to move on. But I don't know how it worked after that fact. But he was pretty happy afterwards, but he had to really, you don't want to lose somebody.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
just to go back, I'm sorry. Michael Tarascio Jr., Michael's son, is in the film too, and he talks about his experience. And it was kind of he had a rough childhood with Michael as well, because he spent his early formative years with his mother, and then at some point his mother said, "Okay, I'm done with you. You're going to go be with your father." And Michael was very kind of keen about talking about not really fixing his relationship with his father there at the end. He still had a lot of questions and a lot of loose ends.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, it was quite sad, quite powerful at the end. I definitely sort of I felt that at the end of the film, and it was very well done. Obviously, you guys got this in the can. In technical talk, we got this in the can well before the beginning of 2020 was probably a good thing.
Yes.
I finished up on April. I finally locked picture about April 1st, 2020.
Oh,
and
wow!
I was very excited. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to go to all these festivals. I'm going to meet all these people. It's going to be great. I mean, we've got into this prestigious festival in Warsaw, and it's just like, oh, I don't get to go.
Yeah, that's rough. Well, we're glad that we get to
Oh,
meet you
no.
anyway, even if it is
we appreciate
virtually
it.
and remotely.
No,
We're glad to have your film in the festival.
it's such a treat. The first film we did didn't get quite the success we're having with this one, but I mean, Boston for me was a big get because I was going to go back to Boston and see all my family that live in the area. I mean, I have family up in Wakefield and Reading and Melrose and down in Hingham. And it was like, oh, this is going to be so good. And I got Mike Tarascio. I can meet him too.
That's right. And you could have seen me and bought me a beer.
Too.
Hilarious. All right. Well, what's the plan now with the film? So now that we've got it out and it's hit the festivals, and is there a plan for broader distribution?
We hope for broader distribution. Whether it's going to come together or not is hard to say. I mean, Greg and I we work independently, so we don't have we don't have anybody behind us, saying we're ready to put out a DVD or get a big release or anything like that. So we're kind of at the mercy of the whims of fate at this point, and just hoping that we get enough of a response from people actually seeing the film, which we didn't get for our first film. Now we actually have people that are seeing it. And so we hope that brings somebody to our doorstep. And I know Greg's had a little bit of contact with some people, so we're sort of sitting back with our fingers crossed and waiting to see. Greg, you could probably speak to that better than I can.
I mean, at this point, we're in what's the festival season, right? And the idea is that hopefully we can get to enough different people at enough different festivals that we can get a little traction, that somebody will see the film and go, oh, we need to get that to a wider distribution. And hopefully we can meet that people by going to places like the Boston Film Festival and meeting people there. And that's kind of the downside of the pandemic, is that we don't get to physically meet these people. But I think with the advertising from the festivals, we'll get the word out there.
Excellent. And I have a feeling that you guys are probably going to continue on together and make more movies. Is that the case?
To be determined. There's definitely more topics out there. Like I said earlier, there's some very interesting characters in the realm of fencing, and there's a bunch of them I'd like to tackle, and it's just a question of whether we can get the funding. Obviously, that's the first thing, but also a lot of the topics that are really of particular interest to me that I've been looking at and thinking about are from people from pretty early in the previous century. So we're talking about people that were alive and active in the sport in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And there's not a lot of people that can speak to that time period. It's just like people have all passed away, and there's not a lot of voices that we can go to that can speak to some of those topics, as interesting as they might be. And then you just wind up with, going from still photograph to still photograph to still photograph. And I'm not sure how interesting you can make that.
It's quite a niche sport too, wouldn't you say? Like it's something that's a very let's just say I don't know too many fencers personally. Obviously, you're in a different position, but is it still a big sport? I mean, obviously the Olympics, it's super exciting to watch, one of the best to watch. But is it still thriving sport today?
It's a huge sport, but I think in the United States it probably doesn't get as much press because there are so many other different sports for people to look at. Whereas in Europe, I mean, they're like superstars over there in the sport. And I mean, it's kind of, we've made the film for the United States, but hopefully we'll gain traction in Europe because the sport is much more popular. I mean, they show live matches on the television. I mean, we can get them here on YouTube. And if you're in the know, you can go and see all these sports. But I mean, in Europe, it's much bigger. But the United States, I think with the success of Greg Macialis' son, for instance, who's also in the film, his success at the Olympics, which was a big deal for the United States, I think is going to push the sport forward here in the U.S. I mean, it's kind of started with Mariel Zagunis at the Greek Olympics, where she won gold in saber, and people got more interest. And just, I think more and more kids are getting drawn to it because they're seeing our United States fencers at the Olympics and venues like that. And I think it's helping to drive the sport, but we still have a long way to go before we catch up with the popularity of it, let's say, in Europe.
Even with that, the sport has grown tremendously. Even since I was a competitor, there's a lot more members in the field, and we've had much better results. It's interesting because collegiately, fencing used to be a pretty strong sport at the NC2A level, and that has really dropped off. And instead, what's grown up in the sport is private clubs. And there's a lot more private clubs now, and they're really focusing a lot of clubs are focusing on getting kids 6, 7, and 8 to get interested in the sport. And then you can bring them up at the same time, the same way that kids have been brought up in the sport in Europe for decades. And we're just now getting to the point where that's become commonplace for places that have fencing clubs. And we're seeing that in the United States' Olympic results. We're a threat on the international stage in a way now that 25, 30 years ago, we were not at all.
For a newbie watching it, is it dangerous? Is it a dangerous sport?
No, it's really not. It's actually one of the safest sports. Michael, you coach every day when you can be around human beings.
When I can.
Maybe you can speak to the safety of it.
Fencing is safer than golf.
Really? Oh, because that's right. You get struck by lightning in golf, don't you, and have heart attacks.
That's right.
Or somebody hits you with a ball. And I'm serious, it's safer than baseball. We're talking about statistically, and this is coming from the USOC and the International Olympic Committee on all of the sports. And it's just like, it's extremely safe. I have been doing this since 1961. And I know that accidents happen. I have never seen an accident.
Wow.
Never. I've seen people that twist their ankles, but no, it's extremely safe. And the equipment right now is so much better as far as safety stuff from when I started.
Yeah.
Like I look at some pictures from when I started, I say, oh my gosh. What is that? But everything has really improved a lot in safety. In the United States, the fencing started to take off when the Soviet Union dissolved, because then we had Eastern European coaches coming over, and then they took it to another level. And then the American coaches, a lot of them picked up on the styles and everything. And then what Doug was saying, Greg Marcialis, who was my teammate, I regard him as the #1 foil coach for men in the world. And, it's just incredible. And he learned, and he was one of Michael's students.
Yep.
And Michael is so far ahead of the game. Oh, so far, he was like, I can't even describe it. He was way, way beyond anything.
Is there someone that you could compare him to in a mainstream sport that, like a Tiger Woods of golf? Is he a...
Oh, gosh.
Michael, okay, so you look at the film and you think like real fast the history. So he worked on Wall Street, then he left, and then he came into California. He fenced in 1967 at the national championships. They wouldn't let him on the Pan American team, which was really big at the time, because he refused to cut his hair, even though he was defending champion from 4 years past. Then he was selling the Berkeley Bob, which was a hippie newspaper, and there's a gentleman that saw him and says, come on, and took him to Halberstadt, which was a fencing club. Michael had no idea how to coach. He had never had to coach before, and he did. And then from there, and he was like world champ. He was military world champion. It's like, are you kidding me? So that means like he's got short hair. And Al Morales was on that team too. And Michael won that event, international. So there's a little like competition, okay? and then Michael was able to, how do you say it? He was able to get through the establishment because the establishment really didn't like him in the late 60s. And then he ended up being the Olympic coach.
76.
Wow. Yeah.
I think the thing about Michael is, to compare him with somebody, he was a great fencer and a great coach. And there's not a lot of examples where you can see where somebody does both. I mean, we have great golfers and we have great golf coaches. We could say Tiger Woods, and we can say, Sean Hannity, right? Mm-hmm. There were two, but Michael was able to embody both of those things. I mean, he was on the world stage, getting respect from everybody internationally. And then he quits and he becomes a coach just by hook or by crook. He doesn't know how to coach, but he becomes a great coach, and he leads the San Jose State University to 5 straight women's foil championships. And then he has, athletes on teams from 1976 to he had Soren Thompson was like his last student, who was in the 2004 games. So, yeah. I mean, here's a legacy of a man, and it's kind of say, well, what does he compare to most? And there's not really, he's a unique figure, and that's kind of why we did the movie.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always like when people prove that statement wrong. You've probably heard the statement before: "Those who can't do, teach." And it seems like this is a person that's directly sort of flown in the face of that, because he's achieved the highest accolades and then he's gone on to teach. And I think that's quite remarkable.
Absolutely. And
Well, I want to
too, because Greg Macialis, who was one of his students, is now the national foil coach for the United States, and his son won a silver medal in Rio, and he's got two of the top fencers in foil that the country's ever had.
Sorry, what was that?
Michael's legacy passed on down through one of his students, Greg Macialis, who's in our film, and Greg is the national foil coach of the United States, and his son won a silver medal in Rio. His fencer, Garrick Meinhardt, was the first U.S. American foil fencer to be ranked #1 in the world. So Michael's legacy as a coach has passed down through his students as well.
Incredible. So it keeps on giving in a way. All right. Well, I wanted to say thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us today, and also for making a great film about a very unique character. You've certainly piqued my interest in the sport again. Is that something that you were hoping to do with this film, is use as a vehicle to sort of encourage people to start looking back into fencing if they had drifted away?
It's a fun game. You know, there's a lot more clubs out there than you'd think. And if you can find one and you've never tried it, you'll find a really fun game.
Amazing. All right. Michael, Greg, Doug, thanks for joining me. And yeah, we're looking forward to seeing many more films coming from you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
All right. See you guys later.
All right.